I can't speak for anybody else.
Welcome, everyone. I am really excited that you guys are all here. My name is Courtney Wallace, and I am the Bolivar supervisor for the Tuscarawas County Public Library, and I am one of the committee members for One Book, One Community, and we've been working really, really hard to bring this program to you guys. So we're very excited for you to be here. I would like to just do some housekeeping things. If you need a restroom, we have 2 in the back. There's one also down in the lobby. The keys are at the desk. They're labeled by letters. So if you need to use that anytime, just get up and go. And then also, oops. Oh. Our friends of the library, Jackie, is over at a table. She is going to be selling raffle tickets for upcoming programs and things. And if you would like to join the Friends of the Library for Tuscarawas County Public Library, that's available. Also, we are giving away a free book tonight. So make sure you stop by and put your name on a raffle ticket and your phone number so we can give that to you as well. And we're just very excited and for you all to be here. And now I'm going to pass it on to Jim.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jim Gill. I'm the chair of this year's One Book, One Community project. So I wanted to just, first of all, again, thank you all for coming. Panel, great turnout. Everybody I asked showed up. That's excellent. Thank you very much, guys. Public, thank you for coming out today. I know there's a lot going on a Thursday night in the Valley, but this is the place to be. Wanted to let you know, we're about halfway through One Book, One Community for this season, and there's still a lot of great programs that are available for you to participate this fall. At the table where the Friends of the Library are staffing the table, there are brochures of all the other events and programs related to One Book, One Community. So please, on the way out, if you don't have one, grab one. I'm sure in the lobby in their nice display, there's more information on upcoming One Book events. I want to point out a couple. We are leading up towards our main event, that's when author Deborah Wiles comes to Kent State Tuscarawas. That is Monday, November 7th at 7 p.m. in Founders Hall. So if you had to go to one more thing, that's when we want you to go to. That's where the author will speak, do a book signing, and that is the culminating event for One Book, One Community. So we really want to encourage you to be there. I do see a few One Book Committee members here. I'm going to embarrass you. Wanda Crocker here, raise your hand. She's on our planning committee. Rachel Bowers, yeah. Rachel is the 2023 chair. So now she can't back out because I said it publicly. That's on tape. Jan Warden. Am I missing anybody else? Courtney Wallace, of course. Thank you guys for being here. I wanted to pay the bills. I have to read the sponsors. This is what makes this all happen. This is what allows 1,200 copies of this book to be in our schools in the Tuscarawas Valley. So I wanted to mention WTUZ Radio, and these are not in alphabetical order. I failed as a librarian. Dover Philly Federal Credit Union, the Heyman Foundation, First Federal Community Bank, the Friends of the Dover Public Library, Nathan Springer Orthodontics, United Way of Tuscarawas County, New Philadelphia Elks, Simona Bolteron down in Cumberstown, Friends of the Tuscarawas County Public Library right here, Garcia Foundation, the Kimball Foundation, the Tuscarawas County Community Foundation, the Zimmerman Foundation, Dover Exchange Club, Kent State Tuscarawas, Commercial and Savings Bank, the Moonmont Foundation, and McIntyre Realty. So at this point, I want to turn the podium over to our moderator tonight, Mr. Bob Scanlon from, what is this? Is he retired? He's always the WJER guy. So let's give Bob a round of applause. He will keep the evening flowing. We introduce our speakers, and we'll keep be the liaison between the public and our program tonight. So thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Jim.
Can we move this table so I'm
Absolutely.
not outstanding in my field?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
While we are getting Dean squared away down there, I want to also welcome everybody here for the event this evening and thank all of you who did the work to make this happen. There's always a lot of work that goes into this that is, of course, unseen and unappreciated. But one of the signs of success is when you read a list of sponsors that long, you know people have been working at this. So we are very grateful for everybody's contribution tonight. On my way here this week, I noticed in the Akron Beacon Journal from Wednesday, the front page story is on Kent State and the fact that there's going to be some sort of a movie produced. But I thought how ironic that this is going on here this week and this is the front page of the Beacon. I can tell you right now, we have people on our panel who was that delivery boy for the Akron Beacon Journal during this period of time and probably carried that edition that followed this terrible event at Kent State University. We'll meet him in just a moment. We are going to meet our panel. What we would like to do is simply start with Dean, and we're going to have you talk about who you are. Most people are going to recognize your relationship to Kent State and to the events, but some of you here may not be known why you have a relationship to that. I thought it was interesting in Deborah's book, on her notes at the end, she said, it gave me the courage to tell stories that weren't the mainstream stories in the press, that weren't the established, this is what happened stories. This encouragement gave me a way to honor the memories of those who were there, but outside the main story. So tonight, we'd like to have an opportunity to meet some of the people who were there, and perhaps outside of what we would consider the main story, but all of those threads come together to tie this narrative together. In fact, even as I sat here tonight and saw old friends, I realized that they too had their own involvement in Kent State that day, that moment. And some of them are here that night to see if their memories match up with the memories that you will be hearing here tonight. So again, thank you for coming. What we'll do is we'll have everybody come down the line and introduce themselves, tell their relationship, and then we're going to go right to questions, because really, once you hear their stories, we hope you have a great many questions, and we will try and answer as many of those as we can. We do have a wireless mic. We would ask you for questions. We're going to do our level best to get to you so that everybody can hear your question and everybody can then hear the answer from the panelists. But to start with, Dean, you want to kick this evening off?
Thank you. Well, good evening. My name is Dean Kahler. I was a student at Kent State University on May 4th, 1970. I wasn't scheduled to be at Kent until the fall of 1970, but during the so-called Nixon recession, I was laid off at Republic Steel where I was working, and I wrote to Kent and said, may I come early? And he said, sure. So I went up and did the orientation, did the tour of the campus. Of course, I knew the campus because I was visiting my friends and the kids I went to high school with who were going to school there. I didn't have the money to go right then, so I was working in a steel mill at that point. And so, I went to Kent and had a great 5 weeks. It was a nasty weathered weeks that I was there. Snowing and rain and windy and just miserable 5 weeks, as Northeast Ohio can be on occasion. And so I remember hearing about what was going on at Kent State University. I went to see, I think it was Jerry Rubin who was there at that point, and he was out there. He was wild, and that's bizarre. But I grew up near Canton, Ohio, a little village called East Canton. I grew up in the Church of the Brethren, which is what they used to call the old Dunkers. We were an Anabaptist church. In fact, one of our churches is located on the grounds of Antietam. You see that white building? That was an old Dunker church. In fact, I've been in that church with some of our historians who, from the church, conducted a traditional service that would have been happening in the 1860s when the Civil War was happening as well. And many Dunkers came to that area to help drag soldiers off the field and treat them the best they could at that point in time. So that's a little bit about my historical background. But I grew up in Osnaburg Township. I worked on our family farm. We didn't live on the farm, but it was my grandfather's and my great-grandfather's farm. But we lived right beside it. And so I grew up milking cows. And I grew up in a mixed marriage also. My mother was Republican and my father was Democrat. My father was active in the union at Hercules Engine Factory. And so, you know, we had a steady stream of UAW stuff coming in, and my mother made sure there was a steady stream of Republican stuff coming in. But back in those days, Republicans and Democrats could get along in civil society without tearing each other's eyeballs out. And so that's the environment that I grew up in. Grew up reading Time magazine, Newsweek magazine, Look magazine, Life magazine, and we got the local Canton repository. I almost said the derogatory version. But anyways, so you know, my parents were of that generation, the greatest generation. My father fought in World War II. He was in the South Pacific, and you know, saw some pretty crazy stuff. My mother grew up in an orphanage as a young lady. Her mother died, I think, a year after giving birth to her youngest son, and it was during the Great Depression. And my grandfather was a civil engineer, and he worked on the Muskingum watershed, so he couldn't afford to, and of course none of the family could because it was the Depression. So he put them in an orphanage, Catholic orphanage, in Columbus. I think it was East Main Street. And so that's how my mother grew up. And so, you know, education was very important to her. And so I was the oldest child, and it was expected of me to go to college, and I did. And lo and behold, it was at Kent State University on May 4th, 1970. And you know, the rest is history at this point in time. I guess, is that enough of an introduction?
It is your introduction, sir, so if you think that's enough, we'll follow with you on that one.
All right. So, yeah, I think that's enough. Yeah, I mean, I had never seen an anti-war demonstration, but I had never been to one either. And I read about them in all the news magazines and all the newspapers. I knew enough because of my religious background that our church has a history of being conscientious objectors. So, you know, I had grown up knowing that the church had that view, and it was sort of preached into my head that I need to consider those kinds of ideas when I get old enough. And so when I turned 18, I went down to the superintendent's office in school and asked for my selective service paper to fill out. She handed it to me. It was completely filled out. All I had to do was sign my name. It was typed and everything. And I said, you didn't fill it out correctly. She goes, yeah, it's perfectly done. Just sign it. Get back to class. I says, I'm not going to sign this document because it doesn't represent who I am. And so she got huffy and went into the superintendent's office, slammed the door behind her. And 5 minutes later, the superintendent came out and asked me what was the problem. I said, well, you know our family. You know I grew up in the Church of the Brethren. You know, and we're pacifists. And you've got to mark down here. You know, you got to make your intentions known at the very first day when you sign that selective service form. And so, you know, after a little discussion, he said to the secretary, give him a blank form. Let him sit here as long as he wants to fill it out. And Mr. Thoma was a pretty rational man, but I think he was perturbed at her more than he was at me. And so I filled it out and sent it in, you know, gave it to them. And lo and behold, I had to go through the process of being interviewed and writing essays and getting references and all that kind of stuff. So that's my background that I had at the time. And of course, I was against all wars, not just the war in Vietnam. I am against all wars because we're human beings. We have a way to rationally work things out. We have something between our ears that most animals do not have. And so that's the other part of my belief about being a conscious objector. And so I had that history. And to finish up, I'll just say that Kent State was a watershed in my lifetime. And as I tell many people, I really only had one bad day at Kent State, and that was May 4th. And I have a lot of the other college experiences that everybody else had, but I had a little period of time from May until I started back again in January of 1971, where I went through Hades, so to speak. I mean, my body just reacted to having a bullet in it and all the things that go along with having your ribs broken and one lobe of your lung taken out on the left side, and the damage that was done inside to me as well. And so I'm lucky to be alive. I'm very thankful to be alive, and I thank the Lord every day that He gave me another day to wake up, breathe, and do whatever I can. So that's my introduction.
I'm not gonna try to compete with that. I'm probably the only person you've met from South Dakota, where I was raised by my grandmother, a farm boy, and I'm also the oldest person in Cigavic. And I went from South Dakota to New Orleans to college. There was a little shift there between the South Dakota farm and New Orleans and the French Quarter. Then I transferred home to South Dakota. Then I went to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin, where I had a lot of experience protesting the war in Vietnam. Wisconsin was one of the hotbeds of protest. And then it was time to go get a job, and a friend of mine, also from South Dakota, had gotten a job at Kent State University. He suggested that I apply to Kent State. Everybody at Wisconsin said I got hired, obviously. Everybody at Wisconsin said, "Where are you going? Where'd you get a job?" And I'd say, "Kent State." And they said, "Where?" Nobody knew it. If I can't say, all I knew is I'd seen a jersey in a sports magazine. A year later, everybody knew about Kent State University. So I came here to Kent, taught in the English department at Kent for 3 years. So that was my first year as a full-time faculty member. And I used to say that was the worst day of my life. It wasn't the worst day of my life. It was the strangest day of my life. I have to say that May 4th, in my recollection, in a way stretches from May 1st for at least 6 months, and in some ways 50 years after that. I was teaching English, and I got out there, and our famous Melville scholar and I went to lunch. So we were not right by Blanket Hill at first, and we were coming back from lunch where the protests had been going on for quite a while. And we came around the corner and heard shots, heard the barrage, if you will. And we were far enough away that we couldn't get in and help. We sort of observed, and then it was discovered that we were faculty members. I was a first-year faculty member. And so Satterfield Hall, which was to the right of the parking lot past which everything occurred, we were ordered or asked, I think it was ordered actually, to search every faculty office. Now what that would have had to do with what occurred, I have no idea. What we discovered were, I suppose we were supposed to be looking for guns. We didn't find any guns. We found about, I'd say about 2/3 of the desks had a bottle of some kind of alcoholic beverage. Well, what can state? And then we started, nobody talks much about really the after situation. I ended up with 13 people sleeping in my house that night. About half of them students and half faculty. I happened to live in a house too big for me. two-floor house, and everybody seemed to get along, and it's hard to explain how long it took for everything really to register. 4 dead in Ohio, yes, but in some ways I would say that the 6 months following May 4th was as stunning in their own way as the day itself was, which was in a way sort of foggy by the end of it. And so this South Dakota boy then 3 years later was sent to Tuscarawas County and lived and taught here ever since. There's been 52 years, something like that, a long time. And I love Tuscarawas County. And I have, as you might imagine, spoken about May 4th in Kent State, and almost always, as quickly as I can, I switch to that period following May 4th and the strangeness of everything for the next, well, I was teaching the final section of my classes, which of course were disbanded again at Oberlin. I'd drive once a week to Oberlin, and so would the students who wanted to finish. And there were a lot of other unusual and strange things, as I know everybody knows. And I'm very impressed by Deborah Wiles' book. I took my first look at it, I thought, what, it's in poetry? And then I read it, and even though I've shown up in several books, James Michener's and a couple of others, I'm not in this one, but I'm very impressed by her job. So I will pass the mic on.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. I'm very honored to spend the evening here with all the experiences that people have had with Kent State. I guess I'll just start with what was I doing at Kent State University on May 4th. I grew up in a very small town, 3,000 people in West Virginia, and my parents had divorced, and my father lived in Akron. And I would visit, summers, and when I would visit in summers, after meeting friends, we would take trips to Kent State. Well, I fell in love with the campus, and I fell in love with Kent. And on one visit, after going home, I made a very hard decision, but I basically said to my mother and stepfather, I want to move to Akron. So from there, I had to go to Firestone High School, and I did not realize that going from Spencer High School to Firestone High School in Akron would be my hardest year of college. Like, I had to get tutored. I was, my dad was bringing in everybody to help me, and I was studying like crazy because I wanted to go to Kent. So I made it. I couldn't believe it. I got accepted, and I was so excited. I'm 19 years old, on my way to Kent State. It's a dream come true. From Spencer, which, the biggest gathering, I think, was maybe a band rally that I had seen. As you said, I'd never seen anybody protesting. It was a very peaceful, loving, small community. After Kent State had an all-girls dormitory. It was called Corb Hall. And so that was where I was going to live. And when I went to Corb, and I brought this poster tonight behind me. And see, I get a little choked up, but I knew Allison, and I knew Bill. So it was just, I knew Allison because she lived in Corp Hall, and I knew Bill because we had a psychology class together. And we weren't great friends, but Alice and I, we rode the elevator down together. Maybe ate together, who knows, but we knew one another. And so knowing people and I was so young and I was so, I want to say innocent. I just had no idea about all and it was kind of exciting. It was scary, but it was also very exciting. My eyes were this big and I was watching everybody, and no matter where you went on Kent, there were people together in circles and they were talking, and there were posters up everywhere. Then the National Guard came in, and that started to change things. One of the first things I noticed, we went up on the 6th floor of Corb Hall, and we noticed people were painting numbers on top of the roofs of the dormitories. So we didn't know at the time why they were doing that, but what ended up was so the helicopters and the National Guard could identify where people were gathering. So, it was, and we were just like, gosh, why are they doing that? And when I look back on it, and I was on Blanket Hill, I did go to that. I did go downtown Friday night, but I came back before the trouble started. And of course I was on the phone every day with my parents, because my parents that lived in West Virginia were like, you need to get home. I want you to get home now. My father in Akron was, just stick to your classes and stay out of what's going on up there. So I did, but not completely. I didn't do it completely. And I remember being on Blanket Hill, and this is a little embarrassing to say, but it is the truth. There were different people that had brought, flags, and small flags, big flags, and they started burning the flags. And I remember I turned to my friend and I said, wonder why they're doing that, And she said, well, I don't know. And I said, where is Cambodia? I really did not know where Cambodia was. As far as my political persuasion, I didn't have any. I truly could tell you, I listened to my parents at the kitchen table, but I just hadn't formed my own ideas about politics. And so it was just overwhelming to feel that anger on the campus and the difference of opinion. And honestly, I wasn't used to that kind of conflict. It was so new to me. I just had never experienced anything like it. I ultimately, on May 4th, I had agreed to meet in the old student union. You left Corp Hall and you followed the sidewalks, and you followed up, which was a practice field. And I was at the end of the practice field. I saw the National Guard at the top of the hill and beside Taylor Hall. And I stood there, and people were going to class. Some people were protesting. Some people were just going to class. And it was sometimes hard to tell who was doing what. So I continued towards the student union, and then within seconds was when the gunshots at 12:30 started. And at that point, I laid down by the fence at the soccer field, the practice field, and then I went back to Corb Hall, and it was maybe 3 or 4 hours before I knew that Allison had been killed and that Bill had been killed. I didn't know that for a while, and during that time, there are helicopters flying very low saying this campus is now closed, you must evacuate immediately. We went back into Corb Hall, the phone systems had been shut down. Parents parents were trying to call, I was trying to call out. Kids were trying to get home. How do you get home? How do you get to the bus stations? How do you get out? How do you evacuate? And it was just a crazy time. And my father, I had a car on campus, and I took my car, called my dad, and he said, get your friends, come down, they can stay at our place, and we'll take them to the bus station in Akron. So we did that. And what Dan said, I think, is very important, that this went on for 6-9 months, a year after May 4th. One great thing that happened to me, I think I had 8 traffic tickets or parking tickets, and they were all forgiven. I was thrilled. And guess what? My dad never knew I even had them. That was the best part. And I passed all my classes that quarter too, so that was another good thing. But everybody did, I know. We all passed our classes. So yeah, it's emotional for me to go back and relive it, but it is important to do so. Thank you.
My name's Carey Gardner, and my roots in Kent go way back. My dad's family, grandparents moved to Kent in 1928, and my dad and his sister attended the Kent State School. He went to college and graduated with a business administration degree in 1940. Went to work for Lamb Concessions Company in Kent, and shortly thereafter went into the Navy and spent the war in the South Pacific. Anyway, he came back and was interested in he felt civic responsibility and interest in politics, and he got on the Kent School Board, was on the Kent School Board for a few years, and he ran for city council, and he was on city council in Kent through the 50s and into the 60s. And so I grew up, Kent State and students were part of my life from 1951 on. The big old house we lived in always had extra rooms, which were, one year might be rented to 3 or 4 college guys, or next year when he got tired of cleaning up the guys' messes, then he would rent to girls, and then he would get tired of their constant neediness, and so he'd go back to guys. And but I grew up in a house with students living with us my whole, from the time I was born. Anyway, so of course, then I had attended school in Kent, and Kent Roosevelt High School, and there was I grew up, I delivered, as Bob mentioned, I delivered Akron Beacon Journals when I was 10 years old on the Kent State campus. And so me and my buddies, we delivered papers there. We'd go up and we'd watch football games. In the wintertime, we'd go up and ride cafeteria trays down the front hills on the snow. And that was our playground. And so when it came time, where am I going to go to college? I didn't apply anywhere else. I wasn't interested in anywhere else. The house I lived in, I could walk in 3 minutes and I would be on campus. So, and I was glad to go there. I felt comfortable going there. I was very apolitical. I think I had a Nixon bumper sticker on the back fender of my bike in 1960 when I delivered papers on the Kent State campus. But through the 60s, I really had no interest in politics. I was just having fun in school. And in fact, here, I was showing this here. This is my Kent State ID that was issued even before my freshman year started. The picture on here, I look like I'm about 15 years old. I have short hair, a button-down collar, and that really describes my, I haven't changed much. Well, in between,
He'll still deliver you your nurse
that's
picture.
right. Yeah, I've got some old Beacon journals out in the trunk of my car. But, so, you know, I went to Kent State as a freshman. It was more like 13th grade, because my friends, my interests, my connections, things I did. My girlfriend was, when I was a freshman at Kent State, was a senior at Roosevelt. So, I went to football games. I didn't go to the Kent State games. I went to the high school games. I was like 13th grade. And again, I had, my only political thoughts at the time were, well, I've got this draft card now, which I don't have to worry about as long as I am successfully enrolled in college. I'm not gonna get drafted. So that was the end of my political concerns at the time. So come May of 1970, on that Friday, May 1st, I had a geography midterm up there, and I'm trying to remember, was it Franklin Hall on Lincoln Street? It was one of the older buildings there. And Dr. Rainier was the professor, and we did a blue book midterm. We finished turning the blue book, and so I noticed when people were turning in their books, he was saying something to them. Now I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention anyway, so I hopped to drop off my blue book, and he says, okay, now look, I want you to leave out the Lincoln Street exit and leave campus, get off campus. Because he knew I lived at home. And I said, okay, so it's like 11:30, 11:45 there in the morning. So I said, well, I was gonna do that anyway, so I went home. And no sooner got home than the phone calls began, and have you heard what's going on campus? That's how I found out, and followed it from my living room. Well, that was, needless to say, a crazy weekend. Things went from bad to worse, and the National Guard arrived. And at the time, our house was right across the street from Bob and Helen Dix. Bob Dix was the chairman of the Board of Trustees of Kent State University and the publisher of the Record Courier newspaper. And apparently there were threats, or they believed there could be threats to him and his residence there. So I think it was Sunday night, the National Guard put a helicopter at sunset, a helicopter right over top of our house with floodlight lighting up the whole, and it or another helicopter probably had to come in but there was a helicopter lighting up the neighborhood all night. And so we didn't get a whole lot of sleep. So anyhow, I misspoke when I said the warning from Dr. Rainier to get off campus was on Monday then. Friday, for me, was nothing special. Monday, May 4th then was when I was instructed to get off campus and get out of the way, and so I did. So, following that, as Dan said, it was a crazy time. Paranoia consumed the city of Kent. The accounts in the book, while they are fiction, their nature and the thoughts, I think, are dead on from the standpoint of what the residents, those of us that lived in Kent and Kent was home, that the paranoia was really there. The thoughts expressed, attributed to the townies, like me, are quite accurate. The statements by faculty, statements by students in the book, I think all ring very true. And after that, of course, my attitude towards things changed. Probably by 1972, My hair wasn't like this, it was more bouncing off my shoulders. I'm sure I had a perpetual scowl on my face. I still lived at home, probably perplexed my father to no end with my attitudes and statements that I would make and the challenging things I would say to him and the criticisms that I would offer. I kind of became a news junkie, got involved at WKSU Radio, and in 1972 was a presidential election year, and of course that was the first year I was eligible to vote. So primary election time, I wanted to go and vote for George McGovern because he was the anti-war candidate. So I go down to the precinct, and when I walked in, the ladies working in there, they knew who I was. They knew my dad, because you had all your Republican poll workers and all your Democrat poll workers. So I walked in the Republican. Oh, look, here is Dick Gardner's son. Yeah, they're making a big deal. And so I said, yes, here I am. So I signed a book. I did whatever you have to do back then. And they handed me ballots. So I went into the into the booth, and I'm looking, and my only interest really, I wanted to vote for George McGovern. And I couldn't find his name on any of the ballots. And so I walked back out and I said, I wanted to vote for George McGovern, but I don't see his name here. How do I vote for him? Well, those are Republican ballots, So now the Democratic ladies, they start cackling and laughing. They thought this was great. So they gave me the Democrat ballots. I went in and I voted for George McGovern. And the ladies, oh, wait till your father hears about this. So anyhow, that was that sort of capped off then in 1973, I graduated, moved to New Philadelphia, and I've been here ever since. So that's my story.
Very, very interesting. This is a great group so far, and I hope to continue that. In 1967, I, with a great bit of innocent craziness, started at Kent State University as an English major, wanted to teach school. That's all I really cared about. And there were these things called the Loft, which was a place where you got something to drink if you wanted to, beer blasts and all kinds of people and friends and new people. There was fraternity rush, there was excitement. I ran for student government. I was part of Wright Hall. You remember Corbin, Wright and Tri-Towers. And it was just so much fun. My parents were proud and happy that in fact their first family member had gone to college. Since I was yay high, I was going to college. I thought everybody did. And then I found out, no, there was not a chance for everybody to go. So I was very, very happy and special, and it was great fun. And I started with this crazy innocence, but by 1972 when I left Kent, I had an experienced seriousness. That change from fraternity, from swallowing goldfish concepts, to what we went through, lasted a lifetime. We can see it in our panel member, and I have the greatest regard for Dean. It was so incredibly real and so incredibly unexpected. So let's go back through a couple of things that happened, not just that day, but that entire weekend. A friend of mine had come down, and we were going to kind of have some time to have some fun, and we'd heard that something had happened downtown, and that was Friday night, I believe May 1st, if I'm not mistaken, and we went downtown, and he had said, is anything happening? And I said, no, this is, what a surprise. The broken windows, all of the things that happened, we know what happened now. Okay. Crazy night, that won't happen again. And there was going to be a rally on campus on Saturday. And there was something about a building, an ROTC building, that was going to be, and that ROTC building was going to be destroyed, I believe. It was going to be leveled at that summer, if I'm not mistaken. It was an old building. How many times we all walked past it? How many times we thought about it? Never really thinking about the symbolism of it, other than some ROTC members and some of us weren't. I was an English major. That was it. But when I stood there watching that building set ablaze, be put on fire, I had a very great feeling of ambivalence. Feeling, we shouldn't do this. This is not right. We shouldn't be at war. That's not right. And when that building went ablaze and eventually came down, there was an excitement, an exhilaration of the symbolism. Not the aggression, not the destruction, not the symbolism of what needed to be done. This war had to end. And it was almost like a catharsis at that moment. So being back to, I kind of went home that Sunday, and coming back that Sunday night, this light came shining down. Return to your dorm. And the helicopter. And it's mentioned in the book. And I thought to myself, you're going to stop me from where I want to go? And I was only going back to my dorm anyway, but you're going to tell me I have to go there? You're going to tell me this is necessary? You're going to tell me I don't have a choice? You're going to tell me, return to your dorm. I did, but I thought, what would it be like to live a life like that? In a country like that? This is a crazy, isolated situation. This will never happen again. Not in America. And that was the helicopter, and it's mentioned in the book. So then we get to Monday, May 4th. And the seriousness took over. It was no longer that innocent craziness. We knew this was serious, but we had no idea what was coming down the pike. We had no idea what was happening to be. We only knew that we wanted to be heard, at least in my mind. And we were not necessarily intensely aggressive, but there were aggressors on our campus. They were called the National Guard. There was law and order being put back on our campus. We always had law and order on our campus. It just manifested in things called free speech, and it manifested in idea of self-determination, an idea of maybe this war isn't such a good idea. And when I watched and saw the helmets and what I call the flak jackets, and when I saw those bayonets and guns, I thought there's no place for this on campus. This is not what college is about. This is not what Kent is about. This is not what we are about as young people. Yes, we're voicing our concern against a war we don't believe in, and whether we were active with that or whether we were innocent with that, we all had to face that, and we did face it. And I remember very clearly being in the crowd about 3/4 of the way, and if you remember the pagoda, and if you remember they went up toward Taylor Hall, they turned and they fired, they shot. I hit the ground. Remember when you were a little kid, guys that used to roll around playing soldier? And that's what I did, thinking, I don't know if this is really happening or not, I don't believe it. And I looked and I saw a trail of blood. And that trail of blood led to an individual. And the chaos ensued. Dean was at a situation where I remember watching him being put into the ambulance. And I had very casually known Dean through another friend, just in a friendly kind of a way. And the shock that he was really hurt, the shock that others were really hurt, made me numb. Made me numb. And I just wanted to go home. I just wanted to go home. And in that numbness on my way home, the only thing I could remember thinking was power to the people. That we cannot let, whether it be politicians or military or anybody, take away that which is ours, because they shot us. They shot us. They really did. And we wanted to believe that was an isolated situation. And there were a couple of stories that happened. My own father, who I loved dearly, he sacrificed tremendously for me to go to college. When he said, yeah, all of them should have been shot. And I said, Dad, I was one of those all of them. And I know he didn't mean this literally, but he looked at me and he said, if you were there, you should have been shot. And that I knew he didn't mean in reality, but that's how polarized people were. I was working a job where I delivered, during that summer, construction lights flashing lights by construction areas, I'd go to a beverage store every day and I'd get a soda. And I did this for about a month or so. And one day I happened to go in and on the TV was mentioning at Kent State, and the beverage owner said, hey John, hi, how you doing? Blah, 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 blah. How's traffic? All that kind of good stuff. And he said, boy, those kids over there at Kent, they really are. And I said, well, please understand, I am one of those kids. I'm working for the summer. He took the soda back and he said, get out. And I said, but wait a minute, get out. That's how polarized we were afterwards. It took me about a year, you talk about the time frame afterwards, to come to a feeling of calm, not peace. I've never come to peace with it. A feeling of calm of what happened. But it was something that, I don't want to say changed a life of mine, but it certainly influenced a life of mine. And fortunately, we were able to move on, and it was one of those things that happened. But one of those things that I'm so happy that this discussion is happening now, how many years later, particularly for young people with the One Book, One Community, this is absolutely wonderful. Because the history of it, the severity of it, the experienced seriousness of it that I learned from it needs to be remembered. And there's many applications we can make today. But for those of us that were there, for those of us that remember it, I guarantee you the influence will always be with us. We need to pass that influence and awareness on to others, particularly young people, in my opinion. Thank you for your time.
This is always difficult when I hear so many stories for an entire hour about May 4th. It keeps me there, but not unusual for me. May 4th has been part of my life for 52 years. I was an eyewitness and survivor of the shootings. I was feet away from my brother and his roommate, who, like Dean, were both wounded in the gunfire. My brother and I and several of his roommates and our friends were also Kent 25 defendants when the Ohio grand jury tried to place the blame for the shootings on 24 students and 1 faculty member instead of indicting guardsmen for murder or manslaughter. And all of that began 52 years of devoting my life alongside my brother, who would still be here probably with me tonight had he not passed at the end of 2020 after 50 years of doing the kind of work we're doing tonight. So I want to thank every one of you who is here to ask questions and to keep the conversation going, because one of the things that's difficult to hear stories is I keep hearing new things I've never heard in 52 years. And I find myself wanting to race back and look through the trial testimony again and all the other research that we've done and all of the ways that we've tried to dispel myths over 52 years and do what I can to make sure that we dispel and continue to dispel those myths until we can have a table like this, and it's all of us who participated, including the Ohio National Guard, who has never been with us when we try to talk about this. We try to understand the truth. Over 52 years, I have said the things I did that I was not proud of. On Friday night, I think the statute of limitations is over, so I'll go ahead and tell you. I spray painted a building with the words U.S. out of Cambodia now. I threw a rock through the window of the Army recruitment office. When I teach student activists today, I tell them that is not what you should be doing if you want to stand up for what you believe in. Those kinds of tactics on Friday night when there was destruction against property, while it might have felt good as student activists, and I understand why I did it, it didn't make a dent in the war. Same thing with burning of ROTC buildings, although the ROTC building that burned at Kent, we still don't know who burned it down. It went up in flames when there were no students anywhere near it, and it was completely surrounded by the Highway Patrol. So I want to know who burned that building down and whether it was one of many that were mentioned in the COINTELPRO documents. If you look at those that came out after J. Edgar Hoover left office, that there were lots of buildings burned down, ROTC buildings in this country, to enable communities to bring in the State Highway Patrol or the National Guard. and they were burned by agent provocateurs. I just want to know the truth. I've read that, and I would like somebody who was part of that to sit at a table like this and tell us why we were all so divided, why we opposed each other, why American soldiers turned their guns on American people. And I didn't come to Kent State as an anti-war protester. As you heard Dean talk, grew up in Barberton, Ohio. My brother and I were in the 1950s among the original Sputnik kids that were put through gifted education when we were so afraid that we were going to lose the space race to Russia. I grew up in a labor household. My dad was a labor leader. We were so staunchly Democrat and Catholic that the dining room had two large pictures on the wall. One was the Lord's Supper and the other was Jackie and the kids. I wanted to be, I believed in war and I believed in America, and I still to this day am a groupie for democracy. I love America. I grew up getting chills with the flag and going through my mother's Army scrapbook. She was in the Women's Army Corps. That's where she met my father in Battle Creek, Michigan, in a hospital where she cared for him after he lost his eye in World War II. And I dreamed of being everything she was, and even looked for the Army ROTC when I arrived on the campus as a freshman. I tried out for a cheerleader and flasherette and came to Kent State wanting to be just an extension of what I was in high school, a cheerleader in every club. I was so conflicted. I was president of Future Nurses and Future Teachers Club at the same time. But at Kent State, I threw away the anti-war leaflets. And I didn't understand why anybody would be protesting the war. The oldest saying, Tennyson, yours is not to question why, yours is but to do or die. I just thought it was my brother's turn to go, as my father did. But I also knew that my friends were coming back from Vietnam with very, very different stories of what they were doing there. They were not proud of their service there. They didn't want to talk about the things they did there, and I knew it was painful for them to recall that. But I also knew that they stood with us when we started to protest the war, and that did not happen for me overnight. But for many of us that were typical Muffy the cheerleader coming out of Barberton High School and going to college to just go to class, when they had the draft and we watched that bowl on television and they pulled the numbers out and we knew our brothers were next to go and they would be put in a kill or be killed position, that's when I stopped throwing the anti-war leaflets away. That's when I began to care. And that's when millions of young Americans like me all over this country just said no more. And it was actually 10 days after we buried my brother's best friend from childhood, who actually died in Vietnam because he was run over in a tank, by a tank driven by one of his own fellow soldiers. And I'll never forget seeing Mrs. Caldwell when they handed her the flag folded, that was all that was left of him. And then to see Nixon expand the war into Cambodia, that's why I was angry enough to risk my freedom on a Friday night and throw a rock through the Army recruitment office window. I don't condone my behavior. I'm ashamed of it. I tell students today, don't do it. It won't change anything. But I understand that I was willing to go to jail if I could draw attention not to the malicious destruction of property I was engaged in, but the destruction of human life in Southeast Asia and the destruction of a growing number of young Americans. I was 19 years old and the first page I read in the Akron Beacon Journal was the obituary column. That war changed many of our lives. We engaged in behaviors that were very, very different. But I can tell you this, because I was there on Friday night, I was actively engaged in the protest against the invasion of Cambodia. I was there on Sunday night when the helicopters first shined their lights on us and we ran from them, and I felt like I was in a war zone. And that happened during the most peaceful protest of the weekend. And I was there on Monday, May 4th, when we gathered, and that's what I tell student activists today. Nobody got shot on Saturday night when there was an ROTC building burning. Nobody got shot on Friday night when people were engaged in destruction of its property. On Monday, May 4th, students across this country, not just at Kent State, but at Antioch and Berkeley and Ohio State and Akron U, college campuses across the country. Rutgers was one of the first that said at noon, we're walking out of our classes. We're not going to go to class. We're not going to graduate from your universities. We're not going to go into your corporations. We're not going to become your doctors till you bring our friends home. And that's when we got shot. It was about 4 years ago when Bob Woodward of the famed Watergate 2 spoke at Kent State, and he read from the Nixon tapes. And it was the first time that we heard Nixon saying hypothetically, what if we killed a few of them, in talking about anti-war protesters. And those of you, a lot of you are, I'm 72, so a lot of you are my age. I think we all remember being called bums by our president. The Vice President Agnew likened us to Nazis in the Ku Klux Klan. The night before we were shot, Governor Rhodes called us the worst type of people we harbor in America, worse than the night riders and the vigilantes. At 19, I was too young and too naive to know the danger of all of those inflammatory words. But at 72 today, I know how inflammatory those words are today, coming out of the highest offices of our government. And we are, none of us, safe when we have that kind of tacit acceptance that people exercising their constitutional right to protest a war can face that kind of consequence in America. It was the saddest thing I did when I walked out of my dorm with my bag, because we had 2 hours to get off campus. And my father, a World War II veteran, said, show me where it happened. And we walked up to the top of the hill just outside my dorm, and there were bullet shells all over the hill. And I reached down and picked up a handful of them, and my father was telling me to drop them because they would be evidence. And I saw those triggermen down the hill and just started screaming at them, murderers, murderers. And I remember my father putting his arms around me and holding me really, really tight, and his mouth was right up against my ear saying, please, please, and he was shaking because he knew just by yelling at these men, they might shoot me. And that was not the America that he fought for, or the America that he raised me to love. I still love America, and I still fight for America, and being here tonight is part of that fight, because we have always fought for truth. And it wasn't easy. 5 years after May 4th, when we came back every year to tell these stories, we had a university president that said 5 years is long enough to remember. 10 years later, while we were still there, Rage Golding, the president, said 10 years is long enough to wear a hair shirt. Like, we were just this irritant that came back every year to talk about it, to share the stories that we're sharing tonight, to make people confront the reality that this can happen in America. And until we know the truth, until we really have the guardsmen up here with us, I'm willing to admit what I did on Friday night, I already did. You know, I want them to admit, I don't want vengeance, I don't want justice, I just want the truth. Was it the inflammatory rhetoric? Was it in order to fire? I know they weren't scared, because all of the evidence over the 52 years that we fought for this shows nothing was happening. Every government investigation, including Nixon's own Scranton Commission, called them, the shootings, unnecessary, unwarranted, and inexcusable. The FBI said that the claims of the guardsmen that they were shooting in self-defense were, quote, fabricated subsequent to the event. So there's a lot of heartbreak associated with Kent, not just seeing the unthinkable, but my brother and I were, as I said, devout Catholics. We were still going to the Newman Center and going to church every Sunday. But I know what it was like to sit in my house when my brother was still bandaged from his wound, to see the Catholic priest at Holy Trinity Church in Barberton tell my mom she wasn't welcome back, even though she lit candles there every day, because we were communists, because we were students at Kent State. That kind of division is upon us again. I didn't think I'd ever see America so divided. We are more so today. So I just really want to thank you for being here, for hearing our stories, and for realizing we tell them because we believe in America and we know we're better than